Report: half of terror plots in Germany by refugees. Nation targeted after migrant crisis. More than half, 54% of terror plots in Germany have involved asylum seekers and refugees since 2014 and the onset of the migrant crisis. The report by the Heritage Foundation think tank found that attacks across Europe by foreign-trained militants increased dramatically in 2016, following the height of the migrant influx, with Germany becoming a much more popular target. The increase in the threat to Germany is especially stark, the report's authors write. There were no plots in Germany in 2014 and only 2 in 2015. In 2016, this increased eightfold. There is a straightforward reason for this. In 2015, Germany took in over 1 million refugees, and 2016 saw a surge in plots involving refugees. Plots in Germany comprised just 5% of those in Europe in 2015, shooting up to 27% in 2016. In fact, the nation faced more plots in 2016 alone than in the decade and a half between 2000 and 2015, with civilian rather than government targets most common. European terror plots and attacks since 2014 by country. So as you can see here, most of these are just plots, because it takes resources and people and usually lives to commit these plots. And for example, the one in Sweden could have been stopped, many years before, because Russian intelligence said this guy is suspicious, we could take this guy in, we want to question him, but Sweden refused, and Säpo, the Swedish intelligence service, also had some information, but they also refused this information. But this is, classical, typical stuff. Let's continue. In total, 142 Islamism plots claimed 300 lives and more than 1,000 casualties in 15 European nations over the 29-month period studied by the think tank. Across the continent, around 15% of the plots, 142, featured refugees and asylum seekers implicated in either planning the attacks alone or as part of a larger cell. The migrant-planned attacks struck 9 separate European countries, but mainly targeted Germany, 12 out of the 22 plots. In Germany, in 2014 and 2015, there were just 3 plots by foreign-trained attackers in Europe, all linked to Iraq, with the most prominent example being the Paris attacks. In 2016, however, the continent was struck by 16 such plots by migrants and foreign fighters, 11 targeting Germany. German Chancellor Angela Merkel suspended the Dublin regulations and effectively opened the nation's borders in 2015. Since then, Germany has taken far more migrants than any other European nation. Europe has had little respite from terror. Since 2014, there have been only 5 months in which 0 terror plots or attacks have occurred in Europe. And as you can see here, it's quite irregular and random, it seems, between the months, because if you look here in 2014 in September, there's 0, but in 2017 there's 14. So it's quite random, but as you can see, as the years goes on, and as you see the years with more immigrants influx, there's heavy increase and consistency between the months. Just look at the 2017 and 2016 here, how much each and every single month has in terror attacks / plots. Before 2016, the year after, around 1 million asylum seekers poured into the nation. Germany was not targeted by those trained abroad, with France and the UK facing the most attacks of this nature, the report explains. Yet, during 2016, 60% of all plots in Germany were conducted or planned by foreign trained militants, all of whom had fought or trained in Syria. In 15 of the 22, 68% plots hatched in Germany since 2014, one of the cell's perpetrators was in direct contact with foreign terror group. This is disproportionately high when compared to the rest of the continent, in which only 64 of the 142 plots, 45%, had one or more members known to have been in contact with such groups. The main source of this threat is from the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Jam, ISIS, which has taken advantage of the refugee crisis in order to smuggle its operatives into Europe, the report's authors explained. And that's the article. Well, as you can see, it's things that I've mentioned before. It's written in ISIS documents that they are coming here to radicalize people. They're using the refugee crisis as a cover for them to infiltrate the countries. They want to create the Sharia zones, etc., etc. You all know by this if you have listened to my videos and if you're active in politics overall. This is no secrets. And if you have followed the other studies, when the migrants come into Italy, you have people pouring in there, and only like 3% out of 360,000 people, only 3% of those people were actual refugees. Rest of them are economic migrants and etc., including ISIS terrorists. That's the insane part. And lots of people have ISIS propaganda on their cell phones.
Yeah, your husband was on one of these rescue ships. Great, carry on.
Yes, and it was a really, really traumatic time for him. He was doing 3-week stint, and they were picking bodies out of the sea of babies, women. It was awful. But at the same time, he said they were processing men, adults in their 30s, who all had phones with ISIS stuff on the phones. They were being separated. When they were being handed over to the authorities with the information explaining that these guys, had all this on their phones and what their ages were, and they were just being processed through. There was nothing, they weren't being separated out. They just all went through with everything else. And it broke his heart because he was dealing with families who were in such a terrible state, with young babies who so clearly needed rescuing. And yet you had adult males that were pushing women and children to the back of the queue when they were being triaged to say, I've got a sore throat, I've got a cough, because they felt that they were just more important. And it's just an awful situation. And this was last year. This was happening. And there were hundreds and hundreds of women, children and men that were being picked out of the sea, but not all of them were refugees. And he came home heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken, because he's saying, I don't know how Europe is going to cope. But what more can we do than pass the information on and give the medical care to those who need it? I mean, the men that would push to the front, he would just push off to the side and say, go away. But they were so unhappy with the fact that they weren't being treated first. And it's a cultural difference that is coming across as well, I mean, what kind of human being pushes a woman with a baby aside to say, deal with my cough? And how are we supposed to process that as individuals? He still has images that he has to deal with, over a year later. We forget about the medics that deal with this, the soldiers that are dealing with this, the people that are processing these people. It's not just how are we going to process all these people? It's how are we going to deal with the trauma of having to process these people, having to make these decisions. Who do you treat first?
Jessica,
which baby?
And how is your husband now in terms of how when he sees this, sees the numbers, sees the 44,000 so far 2017, knowing what he knows, knowing what you know, that this is there's truly people just trying to help. Sounds like your husband was just wanting to help, but having seen firsthand men pushing women and children out the way, plucking women and children from the water, it seems to me that these women and children, I've heard stories of them being locked under in the holds underneath the waterline because that's where they get put. But it seems to me that these women and children are very disposable. They are the disposable humans by these men.
My husband is turning into, it's why I stopped him doing it, he's turning into a man I don't recognise anymore. Because my family think I'm a bleeding heart liberal and, I would just wave everyone in and say, come on, we'll help. And my husband was of a very similar opinion, that people needed help. He's now turning into someone I don't recognise because of what he has physically seen. He is starting to say, this is not all people looking for help. There are people here that are out for their own self-interest. It's almost like flights. They overload the flights and get payments because they know that some people are going to be bumped. He said they are overloading the ships because they know people are going to die. And it's just awful. And now he is building a hatred of a certain demographic that he has been exposed to because he's seen the way they behave. He's seen the way they behave.
And Jessica, that's your husband we're speaking about, who has changed then from being, or is obviously still the same person, but you just said he's becoming someone you don't recognise, a man who went with best intentions to help rescue, but now has a perhaps dislike of a certain group of individuals because he's seen the way these male migrants behave, or at least the way they treat women and children.
Yes, he can't handle the way the women and the children are treated by these men.
And other studies similar to this one that says it's 3% in Italy, all across Europe, says it's either 1 to 5% in similar studies. So to me, it's just amazing that people aren't waking up to this, that these aren't actual refugees or migrants. It's just opportunists coming into our countries. And I have seen this since I was in school. I saw it as economic migrants. People come here not as refugees, but they come here and actually have good lives already. I mean, it's not like they come here poor. And most people come in illegally. And these people aren't afraid at all of war or traumatized or anything. They're cocky as hell and want to beat the shit out of Swedish people. They hate Swedish people. And why do we want to bring in more of these people that hates us so much, that cheats with our tax system and etc.? Why do we want these kinds of people? We aren't helping them. They already had it good. And a lot of these people have their mafia houses, like big white Casablanca houses, and Swedish people are poorer than these people. So how come it's so sad about them? How come these people have it so bad when they have it better than Swedish people in Sweden? I find it very incredible. And just by watching these stuff, it just rings bells all over. Why aren't people doing this? Well, it's the globalists, and as long as we have the globalists like Merkel, the EU and the United Nations controlling us, we're never gonna be free of the Islamic threat. And these migrants, or refugees, as they like to claim it to be, I think it's very funny that they actually made in the articles headline that it's refugees with those quotation marks or whatever they're called, because they're not really refugees, it's Islamic invaders. These are people that are destroying our countries and infrastructures and all of those sort of things, And people like Merkel and other ministers and doctors are gonna come and say, it's a good thing, we're becoming super cultural. And Germany have suffered the most gigantic rape festival in history. I mean, just look at Dresden in 2015, I think it was. Over 1,000 women were sexually assaulted, 1,000 of them, and most of those rapes involved group rapes. It's insane. But this is the state we're living in, where we have to accept multiculturalism, and where terrorism happens, we claim to stand in solidarity, and we're just bending over. The Islamophobia is on their side, because we are actually protesting against the reality of Islam, which is not a religion of peace. It's a horrific deformity to call it a religion of peace. It's such a lie, such a deceitful way to manipulate people's goodwill to believe these people are good, because most of people here in the West don't associate with Muslims. And people who are liberal and, want everyone to have a good, nice, equal chance in life, they're gonna say, well, let's not be so bigoted about this. And these people are being manipulated into believing that these things are good, that Muslims are good, and all of these people are Nazis, because the globalists controls the media and they controls the narrative. But more and more people are waking up to these things. But sadly, Merkel won again, despite so many people waking up, because these migrants are becoming the majority in Germany. It's just a fact. And what Merkel has done is that she have brought in her demographics. She have brought in so many voters. I mean, if you bring in 1 million people, won't that change the country? Especially when they're gonna get voting rights, etc. And Merkel claims that she wants to remove them, but good luck considering how much it's gonna cost. It costs Sweden approximately 300,000 Swedish crowns, because these people goes in hiding. So you have to pay police to go and find them, and then you have to pay transport and everything, and paperwork. It's so many different instances. It's like, it's like you give a person a mission, and then the person will conduct his mission, and he will turn it over to the next guy, and the next guy will turn it over to the next guy. And these things will just be so disoriented, so they all together won't prioritize this at all. They won't just care about this. So these people will stay. And she has flip-flopped so many times. I've seen articles of her saying, we have to remove these migrants. And then she's gonna be like, oh, I'm so sorry, my open border policy wasn't a good one. And then she doubles down on her open border policy, saying it was a good thing and we should continue doing this. So I'm pretty sure that she's gonna revert back to having open borders, and I would not be surprised to see people pouring in still, like in France. They have stopped reporting on it, but if you actually go to these train stations and all these ports where they just pours in, because most people comes by train, I think, because they come to countries like Spain, Italy, and then they get public transportation to France. And these ports and where they hang, it's full of them. It's full of black people. It's full of niggers. It's full of Africans. And a lot of these people also claim that they're from Syria. It's so ridiculous. But we see the results over and over again. It's the same damn thing. But the evidence is being presented over and over and over again. Yet the mainstream media would say, well, no, these things aren't true. These people are actually poor refugees. Look at this poor child that drowned. They're gonna show the same picture and tell the same sob story over and over again. Don't you care about this child that drowned? That's what they're gonna say. They won't tell you about the people that gets raped here. They won't tell you about the people that gets murdered and the migrants that gets 3 years and gets put to prison, and those migrants that actually comes here and tries to make a life from themselves and not bring in their entire family, or just try and come here as an opportunist living on social welfare, etc., and actually make a living for themselves, that does no criminal actions or whatsoever. They get thrown out, on a whim, if there's a single little problem. Because those kinds of migrants are not good, because they actually tend to work and make a living and actually benefit the country, rather than the majority of these so-called refugees that actually does absolutely nothing, and some of these people only does crime and doesn't actually do any work. And these people are also declared as mentally unstable, mentally ill. Like, oh, he's raped a child because he thinks it's parts of his culture. Well, sometimes they even get pardoned. That's even far worse. But they get declared as mentally unstable, mentally ill. So they will get a lesser penalty, because they will get treatment and everything. So they're gonna see psychiatrists, and then they're gonna get medicine. All of this on our tax money. But they aren't mentally ill. It's part of their culture. This is what they believe in. This is what they have been taught in their home countries. They're being taught to sodomize people, rape people because they have done bad things, honor killings. These are normal practices. But our governments, like the German here, are the biggest bullshit artists that controls, because our systems have progressed to a socialist one. As the government controls these mental institutes, they regulate them how they should treat people. And these migrants usually gets the definition as mentally unstable and gets a free pass. And whenever they're minor, you know, like 17 or sometimes even 18, depends in what country, they're being classed as children. And then they're just being put into a youth care, even if they have raped someone, for perhaps 3 months, and then they're released. And in some other countries, there's death penalty for rape. But people know here in Europe, you can commit a crime and just get 3 months or whatever. You can kill a guy and get 3 years in prison. And well, if you get 3 years in prison, mafia dudes could just say, you know, pop that guy. We'll pay you $1 million if you kill that guy when you come out. Or 100,000 or something like that. And they will be like, oh, it's so much money, and they're gonna do it, and then they're gonna pay the guy. But, you know, it's so stupid, and perhaps even kill the guy. But people don't get this. They rather keep these murderous bastards than actual good migrants. How come? And how come the government would allow these migrants to get full benefits of our institutions, of our welfare, privilege of getting basic work compared to inhabitants of the country, the native population? So that means the simple jobs will be taken up by these migrants rather than native people. And this will mean that we will have more people that's incompetent within the country. And as we take these migrants in, or Muslim invaders, or whatever we should call them, we will just increase our poverty, and we don't have enough homes for people. I mean, our youth, here in Sweden, for example, they can't move out anywhere because there's no home. You have to wait over 10 years to be able to rent a place. 10 years within the Stockholm region. 10 years in line you will have to wait to get an apartment. And yet they want to pour in more people. And when there's no simple jobs for people, the majority of the people, we still want to pour in more people. How come? How come we have such a craving to increase our country's population? Why is it such a demand? It works perfectly fine without these immigrants. But as we have taken them in, the problems have increased and increased and increased. And we have gained problems we never had before, such as racial ones. Why should we have racial problems here in Sweden when we used to be a homogenic country? I mean, Germany had problems with the Jews, etc., blah, 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 but you get the point. It didn't really used to be such a big thing, unless someone tried to scapegoat things. But what they're trying to do now, instead of saying that the Jews are bad, they're trying to say that we are bad, the German people, the Swedish people, etc. They're reversing this process. And as each terror attack happens, they expand their power. Just look at Britain. Now, if you even view so-called radical alt-right sites, you are going to get imprisoned for 14 years if you repeatedly preview alt-right sites that's supposedly radical. So this newspaper could be classed as a radical alt-right newspaper. Infowars could also be classed as that. Because if you watch the mainstream media, they're going to say that these people are misogynistic, they're racist, etc., etc. And they could be just like, yeah, let's ban these people. Let's say it's criminal to watch these people. They're literally inventing thought police. As more and more of these terrorist actions occur, they will take bigger and bigger steps for government control. These Muslims are just a tool for the globalists. Eventually, the globalists are going to betray the Muslims and they will ban religion altogether. And these people will just be used to make a mixed race, make a global race. Because they don't want blonde people, they don't want ginger people, they don't want brown hair people. They want people with somewhat tanned skin, perhaps pale, dark hair, dark eyes. They want people to look the same. They don't want any idols. They don't want any people to look up to and be like, oh, that person is special. They want people to also be good.